reasons just to walk away. No one would blame you if you didn't want to face the pain. You find yourself up against the wall. You're scared to push cause it might fall, and it just might change your life. You're on the edge, now take one step and you just might find you'll fly. You never know what'll happen next. Don't be afraid to let go this time. It just might change your life. You keep on reaching for a hand to hold. You're scared you'll wake up on the edge of the unknown. You find your heart in a fragile place, afraid to move cause it might break, and it just might change your life. You're on the edge, now take one step and you just might find you'll fly. You never know what'll happen next. Don't be afraid to let go this time, and it just might change your life.
Hi, my name is Erin Kelly, and this is for the class Communications Theory Comms 520, and I will be doing my presentation on the communications theory of identity. So let's get started. The first slide, we're going to talk about the process of communications, and on this slide I have the quote that states, "Communication works for those who work at it." And what this is basically saying is that communications is something that takes a lot of effort, and it's not something that necessarily comes naturally to people. It's something that you really have to work at. It's not a simple process that you can just pick up quickly. So the first point is the way in which one communicates with other individuals is elaborate, and it's greatly influenced by many contributing factors. And we're going to take a look at some of these contributing factors during the presentation. And then also, truth about how humans are formed individually, communally, and by the society that they are a part of is also going to be examined during the presentation. And then we're going to be looking at the communications theory of identity, which provides the prime framework for uncovering the many influencing factors that contribute to the communication process. The next slide talks about my thesis for my paper as well as for this presentation. And the thesis is that a holistic approach must be embraced when gaining knowledge about the human being, as well as the amazing and intricate process of communications. So throughout this presentation, I will be referring to this thesis and proving it as well. So let's get started. First, we're going to look at, on the next slide, the communications as a part of a whole. And what this basically means is, just as a human being is made up of many different parts, so is the communication process. It has many influencing contributors, and the way in which an individual communicates is greatly influenced by where they've grown up, what their family life was like and what it's like right now, and what their community is and their spiritual beliefs. All of these have a great influence on the way in which someone communicates. So the next slide, we're going into a little bit of detail about the communications theory of identity. And this theory was primarily created by Michael Hetch along with some of his colleagues. And it was created to incorporate three very important contextual cultures. And these cultures include the individual, the communal, and then the societal. And theorists who use the communications theory of identity see the identity of a person as the joining point between the individual and the society that they are a part of. And then communication is the link that allows these two to intersect with one another. The next slide, we're going to talk about the communications theory of identity a little more, and we're going to just touch on the idea of the identity gaps that exist within this theory. And the result of this, well, first of all, example of an identity gap would be if you consider yourself to be a very outgoing, well-spoken person and very friendly towards others, but that in actuality that's not how you are. You're more reserved, you don't really communicate well with other people. This would be the identity gap. the way you see yourself is not actually how you are. And that's just one example of what an identity gap may be. The results shows that the larger the identity gaps leads to more negative outcomes. Reduced identity gaps in communication result in better outcomes. And so the better that one is able to understand themselves, the more likely they will be satisfied with their own communication process, because identity gaps will be much less. So now we're going to take a look at each aspect that is influential in the communications process, and the first one is the individual. And as 1 Thessalonians states, a human being is made up of a body, soul, and spirit. And each one of these has to be looked at if you want a holistic view of what an individual is. The communications plays a very large role in the identity of a person. Communications, as quoted in our text by Littlejohn, and I quote, "Communications is the means by which identity is established and the mechanism by which it changes as well." And so communications plays a very large part in who a person is as an individual. Next, we're going to look at the communal. And it's important to understand who you are as an individual, but it's also extremely important to understand who you are as you relate to other people, such as people in your family, in your community, or wherever you might be in a small group or even a larger group of people. Being a part of a community or a group enhances one's ability to communicate effectively, as well as increases the chances of reaching goals. Like the old saying says, 2 heads are better than one. This is actually very true. If you work with other people, you're a part of other people's lives, you get a lot more accomplished. And as the Ecclesiastes 4:9-11 says, 2 are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. If they fall, one will lift up his companion, but woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him. And that's in the next slide. I have that verse quoted. It just emphasizes the importance of really being a part of a community and helping one another. The next slide, we talk about the societal. And this, we get into a little more of how the society that you are a part of affects who you are as an individual, and how in turn that affects how you communicate with each other. People will identify themselves differently depending on the type of society that they are a part of. For example, those who have grown up in an Asian society or an Asian country, they're much more likely to identify themselves as being a part of a community or a part of a family, whereas those who have lived in a Western society are much more individualistic in their identification of one another. Some of the influences that society might have include technological communication advances, and technology has a great influence on a society. And as far as communication goes, the technology advances that are being made in today's society have a really large impact on how one communicates with other people. A good example is just how Facebook affects how people are communicating now. And so the next slide, we talk a little bit more about society. And Facebook actually provides the perfect example of how society can influence the way that people communicate. And actually, Facebook really is something that has made communication in our society a more superficial level. The fact that traditional society is dramatically changing because of the new technologies will lead to a significant change in how individuals view themselves. And this is going to lead more to, instead of people asking, who am I? We're now going to move further into the question of asking, who are we really, or who are you really? Because with technological communication processes, you really can't get a true feeling of how someone is, or the reality of who they really are. And so that's just taking a look at the 3 very important influencing factors of the communication process. And in conclusion, communication is definitely the key that unlocks the door for people to work together, relax together, worship together, and just discover things together. Without the ability to communicate with one another, the human race would not be able to function. The individual human being would also not be able to gain a clear understanding of who they are as an individual. And I believe that the communications theory of identity leaves the individual with a desire to dig further, to search longer, and to ask more questions. It provides the jumpstart to uncover more information about the amazing process of communication and the incredible creation of the individual. So I just want to thank you all so much for listening. I hope you learned a little bit about the communications theory of identity, and thank you very much.